Now, of course, the subject of research is the sea otter and Hydra lutris, a marine predator that feeds on urchins, abalone, and other animals in the ocean floor. It historically has favored kelp beds as habitat, and it bears the richest fur in the world, between 170,000 and more than 1 million fibers per square inch. Now, the sea otter, as you know, is a species at risk. It is currently designated a species of special concern by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. Formerly, it was classified as endangered in 1978, revised to threatened in 1996, and owing to its repopulation, its status has been changed to special concern. So the sea otter population on the coast has been increasing in recent decades, and so it has been downgraded to special concern, but still is a species at risk. This is more than one pelt. I suspect it may be 2 or 3, what they used to call a cloak, the First Nations that sold these pelts to the European traders. Their value as a trade good was first identified by Captain Cook, who was the first European to have substantial contact. The Spaniards had been there earlier, and the Russians farther north. But it was as a result of his meeting with the Moachat people at Nootka, at Yuquat, that he discovered the sea otter and purchased a number of pelts, which they hoped to keep them warm on their search for the Northwest Passage. Yet, arriving at Canton in his ship, the Resolution, they discovered that these were a much desired trade good in China. And he found the Moachat and other First Nations people on the coast sometimes wearing sea otter pelts. Of course, a wonderfully warm fur. This is at Nia Bay. This is a couple of the macaw, but nevertheless a similar story, wearing furs and in particular sea otter pelts. And here is back at Nootka or Yuquat. So they were able to reap 10,000 Spanish dollars for about 100 sea otter pelts that they sold in Canton. And when Cook's findings were published, this sparked a major rush to trade in these pelts. They were such a desired trade good. Britain, and in particular the ports of London and Plymouth, initially dominated this trade from 1785 to the mid-1790s. But by the mid-1790s, the American traders of the newly independent United States of America came to dominate the trade. And they sent ships, primarily these were ships from Boston, but a number of other ports in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York City, and even Philadelphia also sent ships to trade on the Northwest coast. And these are the first 2 American ships to reach Haida Gwaii in 1788, the Columbia Rediviva and the Lady Washington. A year before that, in 1787, George Dixon, in the ship the Queen Charlotte, had arrived on Haida Gwaii. He was from Britain, and he named it the Queen Charlotte Islands after the name of the consort of King George. Now, a typical pattern was that the New England traders would sail from their ports in September. They would sail south down the length of the Atlantic Ocean, because they're following the seasons, round the Horn of South America, up the west coast of South America, and up to the northwest coast, arriving around March or April. And they tried to get there early because you could arrive just a little bit too late and you'd find all the pelts would have been traded. So there was quite a rush and they would trade for the entire season, then head to China to trade the pelts in either Macau or Canton. So they circumnavigated the globe over a period of 2 years. And this shipping led to improvements in mapping of the west coast of North America and the northern Pacific region. Captain Cook, this is Dixon's map of Haida Gwaii in 1789. Of course, he believed it was still one main island. The First Nations, including the Haida, desired Western trade goods. They would trade sea otter pelts and other furs, but for the most part sea otter, for guns, for adzes and axes, which were very effective in working with, in cutting and working with cedar. And this is Canton Harbor in the early 19th century and in 1820, looking pretty similar. Now this explains why the Chinese so desired these furs. This is the Qianlong Emperor, the longest serving emperor in Chinese history of the Qing dynasty. And this is him as a young man in the 18th century wearing a robe with a fur collar, possibly a fur hat. And this is the same emperor in old age in 1796, so well into the period of the maritime fur trade, and he's wearing a fur-trimmed garment with cuffs and collar and trim, and I think quite possibly this is sea otter fur. This trade led to the earliest Western pictorial depictions of Haida Gwaii and other places on the coast. This is Hippa Island from Dixon's published expedition account. And the earliest written records of the Northwest Coast and First Nations. This is the log of the ship Rob Roy that traded on Haida Gwaii and other places on the coast in the 1820s. It also yielded the earliest pictorial representations of Haida material culture. This is the earliest drawing we have of a Haida monumental pole. And this is a drawing from 1799 from the Journal of the Ship Eliza, again of Kiusta, showing a couple of monumental poles, but not the forest of carved poles that you see in the photos such as the one Nicole showed earlier. And the earliest pictorial representations of the dress of Haida and other First Nations. Here's a couple of hereditary leaders of the Haida as drawn by Backstrom in the 1790s. These symbols correspond to ships and surviving logbooks, records of the extant record of the maritime fur trade on Haida Gwaii. And if you look at the first 10 years of the trade, from 1787 to 1797, you see a real concentration of trade in the southern part of the archipelago. Ships would acquire several thousand pelts in their hold, not just from Haida Gwaii, but from other places on the coast. But they were trading for a lot of furs. Then you look at the next phase of the trade from 1798. None of the surviving ship's logs or written records report visits to the southern part of the archipelago. So there had been some violent confrontations between the European traders and the Haida. So that might explain a certain reticence to visit the southern part. But I believe that these were so valuable, these pelts, trading for up to $100 Spanish dollars in Canton. I believe they would have traded in the southern part of the Haida Gwaii if there were enough pelts to make it worth their while. And this is a tabulation of the number of pelts traded by ships from the north coast, traded at Canton from 1804 to 1830. And you see a very high concentration of trade in the first decade of the 19th century, as many as 17,600 pelts in 1805-06, dwindling down to a mere 700 pelts for the entire northwest coast traded in 1829-30. And that suggests to me a strong likelihood of a major depletion of the sea otter on the northwest coast by that point in time. It exerted far-reaching effects on the participating peoples and ecology of the northwest coast. For First Nations, it brought access to much-desired Western goods, axes, adzes, needles, cloth, and so on. For European peoples, the trade generated great wealth from sales of pelts in China, increased knowledge of the northwest coastal region, the first textual documents on the northwest coast, first Western maps, pictorial and textual representations of coastal First Nations. For Canada, the trade set in motion a chain of events leading to BC's eventual incorporation within Canada. And for the sea otter, the trade resulted in the serious depletion of the species, almost certainly contributing to its eventual extirpation on Haida Gwaii by the early 1900s.